Thank you for joining us today, and good morning. Today we're continuing our year-long dive into interoperability with the second of our Executive Forum series. We will get started shortly. We're giving folks whatever time is needed to join the meeting. By way of introduction, my name is Denny Brennan. I'm the Executive Director the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, and I am excited to welcome you to the second session in our 2023 Interoperability series, What is Interoperability? With a focus on understanding interoperability's end goals. Today, we are joined by John Kelly, a distinguished member of the health data community who has been involved in his work at Edifex, in his work with Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, with a number of health data interoperability challenges, advances in technology. And John is one of the leading representatives and leading authorities on interoperability across the country. Let me provide you, if we move to the second page, a little bit about some of the work that we're doing today and what you can do to help make this a successful forum. This is a forum, and we choose the term forum because we have historically, as a consortium, held a CIO forum that we called in the old days when there was just CIOs and not CTOs, CMIOs, chief data officers, and many other leaders responsible for health data. And the forum was a back and forth exchange. So we're encouraging a back and forth exchange, and that you share your thoughts either verbally or in the Q&A window, but we may call on you. If you have a good question that you put in the chat or the Q&A window, we will be sure to answer those questions, and we may ask you to speak, because part of the effort that we're building, part of the goal that we have in the forum is to bring back that free exchange between participants and speakers that was so much part of the forum of old, and try to recreate as best as we can that kind of engagement. There will be a 30-minute period at the end of today's meeting where, if you would like to stay around and continue discussion, we will be here to talk with you and continue the discussion. We will have a recording available for MHDC members, and that will be available within, say, the next 48 hours. If you want to attend remaining sessions and you are not yet an MHDC member or have not yet paid the forum fee, please do so. We'd love to have you for the remaining sessions, and we think this is going to be one of the best events for really getting into interoperability that you can find anywhere. Lastly, look for a survey in your email afterwards. We really appreciate your feedback. We want to understand what's important to you and what we did well and what we might not have done as well. So now let me introduce our co-chairs for the 2023 Executive Forum Series. MHDC Board Chair David Carusio and Board Member Bill Young. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you, Denny. Welcome to the 2023 Forum Series. I am David Carusio, as Denny said, co-chair of the forum with Bill Young. And we're delighted to continue the long-standing forum with new focus on broadening our community, engaging industry and government leaders, and providing a dynamic educational experience for our members. We look forward to seeing you throughout 2023 and hope those of you who are not MHDC members will join our consortium. Bill?
Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Denny. MHDC's new Executive Forum offers a high-level view of interoperability from its regulatory, technical, and industrial roots to essential components and features of the program and projects that it enables. Our monthly forum sessions feature experts from the government, industry, and MHDC membership who facilitate participant discussion and highlight key takeaways. I'm going to go off script for a minute and thank Denny and his team for bringing rock stars to talk to us, right? Our industry rock stars, people like Mickey Tripathi and John Halamka. And normally you say sit back and relax and enjoy, but I'm going to tell you to lean forward, engage, And although he wouldn't admit it,
Mhm.
we're very happy to have John Kelly, who I think is one of the rock stars of our industry. So back to you, Denny.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, David. We're delighted to have you as our chairs, and thank you for those kind and thoughtful words. Now, let me just provide you in the audience the 4 questions that we're going to be asking John Kelly and give you a sense of how this process actually works. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to pose a question, one of 4 questions, each to John Kelly first to get John's perspectives. And when John has spent his time telling you what his view of the world, we're going to turn it over to you as our audience and ask you to provide your comments and your questions. As again, we'll be monitoring the Q&A window if we see a question, but we might call on you to ask the question that you've raised in the Q&A. So, feel free to be engaged. Unmute your mics. We'll have an opportunity to go back and forth between the speaker and you as our audience to answer each of the 4 following questions, or at least dig into these questions in detail. The first question that I'm going to be asking John Kelly is, what does a future enabled by interoperability look like? John, take it away. John, you're on mute.
Well, yes, I am. Thank you, Denny. So just give a quick context and a reference of how to frame how I think about this. Healthcare, we all engage in the healthcare system in many ways as colleagues, as employees, as partners, as stakeholders, as patients, right? As caregivers for family members, sometimes as caregivers, actually as payers and providers and nurses and whatever. And a lot of the system we have today, and there are many great aspects to the system, the way it's designed goes back almost a century. There was a thing called the Flexner Report in 1910 that came out and said, how are we going to standardize healthcare in the United States of America and raise it and fund medical schools and everything? And largely, and there was a great book by Paul Starr, a Pulitzer Prize-winning book back in the 80s that described the social transformation of American medicine that kind of explains how did we get to where we are today. And largely, what we have are some very well-built institutions that have survived over a long time, but they don't necessarily fit the way the world has evolved over the last just 20, 30 years. And so when you think about words like interoperability in healthcare, a lot of times it carries the baggage of how we thought about patient information moving and who actually is supposed to have it, who is intended to have access to it, how those people are supposed to use it, and what are the methods, the standard methods for getting it from point A to point B. And when you look today at, and I think I was fortunate enough to have spent most of my career as the father of a millennial, and seeing how people, under 30 years old process information, interact with each other, and accomplish their day-to-day activities and the things that are important to them. Interoperability really needs to be defined as how we live our lives today. What is interoperability? It looks like you. It looks like the lives that we're leading, with our devices and our interaction with technology through mobile and streaming, and how we can search. I like to say we live in a Google world now. Right? If you have a question, if there's anything you want to know, you just ask Google, right? And it magically reaches out to all the information in the entire world, pulls it together, displays it, renders it to you in a way you can consume it. And then when you're done, it just goes away, right? So, why doesn't information movement in healthcare look like that? We expect it to be that way. I know, I work with Dave Crucio back in the early days of transformation at Harvard when Charlie Baker came on board. And, one of the benefits that we had back then in terms of how we interacted with NEHAN and leveraged NEHAN was that, Dave came from an organization that, did a lot of work in banking. and transaction. And we were asking the questions, okay, so how can, a question on the front cover of Time back then was, why can't healthcare be like an ATM, right? Well, we were asking those questions, and we started looking at things like web services, and that was 20 years ago. So fast forward to today, with the way we interact with information in our lives, right? There wasn't, in healthcare, millennials are demanding power. They want consumer power. Gartner did a lot of talking about the interaction or the intersection between consumer power and data fluidity. That's really what interoperability is about. And when we started the interoperability journey, back under high tech and era, and when the government said, yeah, we got to get interoperable, even under the Bush administration, David Brailer at the ONC coming in and saying, defining the use cases for interoperability, it was a very narrow view of the world. It was a view of interoperability grounded in, really what came out of the 1910 Flexner report, and how doctors and patients are supposed to interact, how doctors are taught, how the payer system evolved, in terms of third party, who's in control, who defines things, right? And I think, another, I hate to call you out constantly, Dave, here, but, I think Dave and I both were exposed to a guy from Oracle early on in our careers, a guy by the name of John Wookey. And he said something very simple and very profound, that the internet is about connectivity, collaboration, and self-service. And if you look at the evolution of the internet in every industry, whether it's travel or banking or media or whatever, it's always about those three things: getting people together, connecting them to the technology, getting them to work together with the information and the processes, being able to cross boundaries, and then allowing the customer to actually do things for themselves without having to ask or pay someone else to do it, right? That's what the internet has done everywhere else. And so when I look at interoperability, and the way Amazon brings payers or buyers and sellers together and provides them with a platform, and then says, have at it. And the way people interact with social networking in the world. I mean, we can all talk about, the good, the bad, and the ugly of social networking and connectedness, but it's a fact of life. And interoperability in healthcare and the evolution really needs to reflect the way we live the rest of our lives. There's a huge disconnect in the way we interact with the healthcare system and the way we interact with everything else. I referenced you, Dave, a couple of times there. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts, where this resonates with you or anybody else in the audience.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that the interesting thing that I keep reminiscing about is how you and I, started with a crazy idea. Everybody said, why would you do that? We've been doing it this way for 20 years prior, 30 years prior. And, ultimately that work that we did with transactions, SOAP-wrapped EDI, led to the CAQH standards, vis-a-vis a couple stops along the way through NEHEN and other things. And that's the power of the consortium, right? That we can do things like that as a group and drive some of these standards up. And I think that, we've sort of lost our way. It seems to me that, everybody likes to talk about what they think is transformational, but it's all in their own little parts of the ecosystem. And it's not looking at the entirety of the healthcare system as a whole. So, I think interoperability is foundational to driving some of the transformational change, and hopefully we can get there over the next couple of years.
Yeah,
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question, John, if you and David, you or Bill, that, we live in a present that's pretty fraught. At post or late COVID, hopefully. It's hard to tell for sure, but we also have major workforce issues in healthcare. We have major challenges to clinicians with burnout and some of the burdens of technology, though technology itself is not the only cause of this burden. We live in a world where, CVS is acquiring Oak Street Health, Amazon acquired One Medical. We're seeing disruption, but it's hard to see, as the question it asks, what does that future start to look like? How do we think about that future through the fog of the present, with the kinds of activities and the kinds of disruptions we see currently? Could you share some of your thoughts, John, about what are some ways in which we can see the future in today? Are we seeing examples of what an interoperably enabled health system might look like in certain organizations in certain areas? What do you see that gives you a sense of we're moving in this direction?
Well, I think when you mention the kinds of things that you mention, and then you mention those within the context of the word disruption, right? I guess I don't really look at those things as disruption. I look at those things as people with investment capital looking to say, well, let's do something, right? And where is there opportunity for us to use old ways of thinking to generate efficiency, right? And generate market power and generate profit and margin, right? These are not grounded. And this is why, you know, I'd love to get a view of people who are, if we have anybody on the phone under 30 or at least under 40, when have you seen these kinds of consolidations? We've been looking at those, you know, payviders, buying and selling, you know, payers and providers coming together and then selling, you know, venture people coming in and prioritizing. I mean, look at the hoopla that Stewart Healthcare went through a number of years ago when they said, oh, we're going to look like real business, right? And I hope there's nobody from Stewart on the phone that takes offense at this, but you know, Stewart's facing some real problems now because the assumption that, oh, if we just make it look like business, if we just let healthcare learn from business, that somehow we're going to magically transform it. But then when you look at the things you mentioned, like physician burnout and dissatisfied patients and whatever, we're not fundamentally changing the way the care is delivered. We keep playing with the mechanism for financing, and we keep talking about how do we incentivize people to change behavior? How do we make patients do what they don't want to do? No other consumer driven industry takes the position that I'm going to tell patients what they want, and then I'm going to restrict access to it, and then I'm going to charge a lot more than they think it's worth, right? I mean, does Sony or Apple or anybody in their right mind do that? No. And so, you know, the trends that you're seeing in terms of owners and buyers and sellers, I don't think reflect the movement, the consumer movement, which is ultimately inevitable. It's just a question of, you know, how much pain do we have to go through while people try to hang on to the status quo, right? People who say they're trying to change the status quo, if we're approaching 20% of the GDP, that means somebody's making a lot of money, right? Why would anybody making a lot of money actually want to change anything, right?
Upside down on that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Across the ecosystem.
Right. So I think when you talk about interoperability and not think about it in terms of, oh, I need to make sure that a patient's record can be seen in an emergency room when they're in California. Honestly, how much healthcare is going to change because I'm traveling to California, you know, 5 times in my life where I actually have to get care remotely, oh, I can get my record there. Is that going to fundamentally change the mechanics and the cost of healthcare? Absolutely not, right? Yeah. But if you look at interoperability in the view of how do you make data fluid, how do you put it in the hands and empower the consumer, that's what's going to drive change. And it will, because millennials and Gen Zers are having none of it. They absolutely are going to demand things, and they might face not enough providers, not enough access to hospitals, not enough, but that's the transformation that's going to be disruptive, not, you know, whether Oak Street gets bought by Aetna or CVS.
And John, you know, the interesting thing there about making my record available in an emergency room in California is only valuable if the doctor attending me actually reads it and goes through, sifts through the pages and pages and pages of you know, everything that's been there, right? Recently had an experience where I was at an emergency room, and you know, there was a you know, part of a system in this this hospital that we were at, and they looked and said, oh, all your records are here. That's fantastic. Now tell me, what about this? What about this? What about? And they didn't read anything, and that was locally, right? And they just kept asking about recent activity, and I kept saying, it's in the record. Why don't you go read it? Too long. Not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, a familiar phrase in healthcare that I think all of us know is you walk into your doctor's appointment, they go, well, what are you here for today? Right.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
right.
What does that tell you with all this technology, you know, with the $8 billion that partners invested in Epic or whatever, and Epic everywhere. How does that question even come up in a visit?
And how do you, transform that and now offer better information that's more salient and timely to the provider so they don't have to wade through tons of stuff?
Yeah, and that gets in, and I think I got a couple of points on another question, but it's about process interoperability, not data interoperability. It's how does and it's cliche, right? Information at the right place at the right time, right? In the course of you having that visit far away, could the doctor, while he's got his hands on your arm taking your blood pressure or whatever, ask a question of the Google question to the care setting and have the answer that they actually need to treat you come back in a concise format that they see as valuable, right? Not like a bunch of characters rendered in some format that they have to sift through with their eyes while they're trying to talk to you and to make observations, right?
I'm going to try to jump in here, guys.
Before we jump, I just wanted to say we're moving at a quick pace. Bill, I want you to hold your thought there for just a moment. We want to get that question from you, but I do want to move to the next question we have on our list, because we're moving fast as the speed of light, and we're covering a lot of territory, and we want to be sure that we get everybody involved in the discussion. So, second question, John, are there specific areas of healthcare that you think interoperability will have a particularly large impact on?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, quality, costs, and transparency, right? I think an observation I made early in my career, it's kind of bizarre. I'm in a Back to the Future state. Someone said about, me being one of the rock stars. I feel like more like, the Halumkas and Tripathis and John Glassers, the other rock stars. And I'm kind of like a Forrest Gump, right? I happen to be there in the room when all these guys were doing all this incredible stuff, right? And when I was a medical assistant at the beginning of my healthcare career, working in a Harvard Community Health Plan Health Center. And we're talking about the early 80s having a fully functional EMR across 14 health centers covering 300,000 patients. I mean, it just crazy. And the work, guys like Don Berwick were just pediatricians seeing their patients using a digital record. And the observation I made was like, wow, with this EMR, with the research, a lot of the people from that old health centers division, the staff model HMO, actually went on to help found NCQA. And the reason is that when you have machines collecting the information, you actually know what's going on in the exam room. You have some glimpse of what's going on behind the curtain, right? And in healthcare, it always feels like the Wizard of Oz to me. Like it's always, well, pay no attention to that man behind the little curtain, right? All this stuff is happening over there, but you don't have any awareness of it, right? It gets extracted, converted, translated into claims data, claims data is totally designed to bill and get paid. It has nothing to do with the care. That's why there have been two separate data streams in healthcare: a clinical data stream that's used for caring for patients, and an administrative or financial data stream to pay for the care that's being delivered behind the curtain, right? And so the idea that things get in a standardized way, the data itself can be moved and ported and accessed quickly and readily and easily in that Google world, you start to approach truth in data. You actually know what's going on behind the curtain of care, which allows you to know where people doing a great job and where people are actually not doing such a great job, for no fault of their own, overworked, unsupported, not enough information, whatever. And the doctor even taking the information, maybe the patient's not providing the kind of information or accurate information on patients. There's always an issue with, do you believe what the patient said, right? I mean, yes, you want to honor the patient, you want to respect the patient, you want to give them credit and put it in context, but you're never sure, even the doctor's never even sure whether the information they're getting is accurate. So having systems and technology that support the notion of interoperability, interoperability goes much further, right? the power dynamic in healthcare between consumers and providers and payers and employers and suppliers. Everybody's got an angle. Everybody's got a job. Everybody's has a reason to be. And over, over decades, a power dynamic gets established, and largely, if you think about, the old, I'm dating myself, but, Marcus Welby, or the vision of the doctor as this friendly guy who knew everything, who could predict the future and reassure you and calm. I mean, we'll call it charmingly patriarchal, right? We know what's best. Father knows best, right? Because medicine and the way it evolved, the solo practitioner out in the woods, miles and miles, before I sleep kind of thing, that created a scenario where you had to depend on a person who knew it all. And when you have a culture that feels that way, and then the other people that come into that culture, whether they be the employers or the suppliers, you get to that point where it feels like everybody knows best for everybody else, right? And so when you think about transparency and hard data that allows you to look at cost and quality at the same time in the same lens, the way we do when we read consumer reports to buy a washing machine, right? That really changes the power dynamic. It puts the consumer in the position of being able to actually make decent judgments, not necessarily great judgments, because there's a lot about medicine and health that is too complicated for anybody but that doesn't spend 12 or 15 or 20 years of education understanding how the human body works or whatever. But, having better information can only improve the process. And that's what gets back to that, the whole connectivity, collaboration, self-service, allowing the patient to be able to do that work on their own and provide their own insight and give input into that, patriarchal system.
Bill, you had a question. I'm turning it back to you.
Well, and it may fit well on this slide too. The thing from a provider, CIO guy here, not very long ago, interoperability meant provider to provider, maybe payers, maybe employers. And I'm hoping we're at a tipping point that, as John keeps saying, consumers, our patients, the people, and some of the technology that we have. And John, talk about the other one, and maybe the tipping point I hope we're at, the CCDs that we're trying to use to share data. It's too much. It's too much data. So hopefully AI, things like that. So I'm optimistic that I'm hoping we're at a tipping point to make some new things happen over the next 3 to 5.
Well, and I think that's a great idea, kind of thinking back at a couple of the comments I made earlier. CCDA, it's built around 40 or 50-year-old thinking, right? It's not render the right information in the right place at the right time. Part of the problem with CCDA or CDA documents that have emerged where they're trying to be used, it's better than having to rely on phones and faxes, absolutely. But when high tech spent all that money trying to develop interoperability as defined, like you said, I mean, when David Brailer came out, what was interoperability? It was first just record the information in EMR. Second use case was have payers or have providers and providers sharing information. The third was let's be able to do population health. The fourth one, oh yeah, throwaway, make sure that consumers have access to their data, right? Well, the first three fall right into that whole patriarchal model where there's payers and providers will decide what's quality. They'll decide what is good care. They'll decide what represents value. Again, going back, no other industry says that value is going to be determined by the suppliers of the goods, right? It's always about the consumer. Now, do other industries do a lot to manipulate consumers and help convince them and create demand through advertising and marketing and, psychological manipulation? Yeah, sure. But it's still, at the end of the day, at least it's the person deciding which beer they like best, right? And whether they, whether they think that something's worth the money that they're spending on it, right? They may overspend, they may spend money they don't have, but at least they're determining that if I spend this $15 on XYZ, it's worth $15 to me, right? Most people feel like if I spend $12,000 a year on an individual policy in healthcare, it's probably got $4,000 worth of value, but I can't live without it just in case I get in a car accident, right?
Hey, John, this is
Yep.
Janice Karen from MHDC. Can you talk to the role? It seems like this is a good place. You're kind of leaning into this of consent and how you see consent balancing with data availability in this respect.
Well, I mean, that's a thorny topic. One of the things, you certainly learn working with doctors in EMRs is doctors feel, and they can make a great case that the more information they have access to, the better care they can deliver a patient. The classic ones are things like substance abuse or mental health issues, right? Most patients don't want to tell their PCP they have substance issues, and they don't want to tell their PCP that they have behavioral issues, right? They want to keep that as a private conversation. But anybody in healthcare who's a caring, healing provider knows that the mind-body connection exists, and that you can't, and every provider, unfortunately, in the, a little bit even almost a health equity issue, because patients don't share, a lot of times providers, and this is just from having worked inside the provider world for enough time and lived with a nurse practitioner in oncology, a lot of providers, they see people that exhibit certain symptoms and they're scratching the head going, this doesn't make sense. They start looking for the gap in their information. And sometimes they correctly or incorrectly fill it in with things like, well, they've got a depression issue or they've got an alcoholism issue, right? So without having that information available, there's an ongoing conundrum in healthcare. At the same time, should patients have consent as to who their access? Absolutely. Should their providers maybe have more liberal access than their payer? Yeah, absolutely. Should an insurance company or your employer not be able to get this information if they can use it against you? Yeah, they should. So consent is an issue. Something I think, again, Dave and I, when we were working for Oracle, and John Wookie, there was a huge amount of work that goes into controlling data at a highly granular data element level, being able to apply rules and roles to every single test result. One of the things that that slip through a lot of times is there are test results that actually, the fact that the test was done tells you something about the patient, but it may not. Someone who's smart can look at 10 test results in a patient's record and then draw the conclusion, oh, they've got a behavioral health or a substance abuse issue or something else, right? It happens in women's care as well. I mean, with the current topics, political topics, hot topics about women's healthcare, there are things that can be derived. It's like de-identifying patients, right? MIT has shown repeatedly, you can re-identify patients from de-identified data a lot of times relatively simply. So do we need to have an ongoing continual conversation about consent, who gets access? Yeah, we do, because the technology is one part of the technology that may not be there yet. Just because there's a lot to know about the actual parameters of particular data elements and how they work together. But do we need to make sure that at least there's a high barrier to be able to say someone cannot have information and someone else can? Yes. I think, though, when you flip around, the reason I say it's kind of a thorny issue now is because one thing that having only payers and providers have access to your data gives you is you have a lot of control under HIPAA. They're covered entities, there's laws, there's regulations. What we've seen with the recent CMS, the pushback, the biggest, probably most fundamental pushback to the CMS regulations to say, look, payers and providers, you haven't done or accomplished interoperability in 15 years with hundreds of billions of dollars. You know what? We're going to put data in the hands of patients, and we're going to let patients give that data to whoever they want. Well, there's plenty of reason to say, you know what, that's a recipe for disaster, because people make dumb decisions. They give information that they shouldn't to a lot of people who are going to use it against them. We see that every day in finance. We see that in consumer goods. We see that every day, how, you know, you want to use an app that adds value, and there's a 15-page data consent policy that nobody reads. They just check off the box and go yes, and then suddenly their data is everywhere, and there's all kinds of scammers out there that are getting people to divulge information that they shouldn't. So, you know, by consumerizing, giving consumers power over their own data, you are inevitably creating a situation where more data will get to bad actors in the system. So that's a long rambling answer, Janice, but I don't know if I touched on some of the things you were curious about.
Well, thank you, John. That was a very helpful answer. This is probably my cue in the pursuit of the ruthless advance of our agenda to move to the third question that we have of you, John, which is, why is interoperability important for health equity?
Well,
and the efforts
I think,
that are going into that.
Yeah. So as an old white guy, I'm going to say that I frequently try to stay out of questions of health equity, because I inevitably say things that I don't realize I shouldn't say. And that's my problem, not yours or anybody else's. But I think health equity, first, having good quality data, and the last point, you know, having hard data. Transparency drives objectivity. Hard data, you know, we think of that as, okay, it's accurate, it's objective, it's qualified, we know the provenance. It also sometimes is data that's hard for people to look at, hard for people to deal with, right? You know, we need to correct for our lack of awareness. Clearly, when you look at the equity issues, right? If you accept that not everybody's bad, that there's a lot of good people trying to do good, but despite themselves, they do harm and they make bad decisions, right? So with better data, with interoperable data, it's not just data interoperability, just not that I can take my data from an Epic system and move it to a Cerner system, to, you know, to a computer, a patient app. It's actually putting context around it that allow us to look at what's actually happening, getting back to that, what's happening behind the curtain, what's actually happening in an exam room. It makes a difference. It allows you to actually really define at where the disparity is. And when I think about health equity, I mean, equity is a big issue in society. Obviously, it spans almost every aspect of our life, because, you know, as the cartoon I put up, I thought this was cute, or maybe not so cute, I don't know. You know, we don't actually see the reality of who we are and what we do, right? And when we build human systems, we make so many assumptions that it is the system reflects what we do, not what we say we're doing, or not what we hope to do with the system, right? So having the interoperability, having the hard data allows you to define where the actual disparity is. And this is, I remember a conversation we were having in a board meeting about health equity data and its collection and whatnot. And I remember, quoting Kamala Harris. This is one of those situations where I shouldn't say things because I know I'm going to get in trouble. Kamala Harris, saying that, looking at equity in the delivery of care after a disaster in Florida, and saying, equity is about making sure that everybody got treated equally, and then getting a whole lot of pushback that no, equity is not about getting everybody treated the same way, right? And it made me think of, my wife dealt with cancer for many, many years, and it was a conversation that always went on. She was a cancer nurse, an oncology practitioner, and how everybody's an N of one when it comes down to healthcare, right? Personalized medicine means that it's about that person, that no matter what the probability says, probability is not the same as evidence. That, just because you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer doesn't mean your outcome is going to be that of 99% of the people that have been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, that everybody is an N of one, and you have to look at the whole patient in the context of the condition and the condition in the context of the whole patient. You can't do that without enough data. Whatever conversation an individual provider has with an individual patient in an exam room, whatever they record in their notes, can't possibly solve the problem of that particular provider having a dialogue with that patient that's meaningful if they're not aware of most of the other conversations and information that's been exchanged or captured about that patient in many other settings. So the whole point to me about interoperability as it results to health equity is, step back from the data. We have to have a commitment. We have to have an awareness of ourselves. We have to be able to have an open mind about what's really happening with that N of one patient, not what we think is happening based on probability, right? And that means having enough information. We'll never have it all, but interoperability is at the heart of being able to have an individual, two people having conversation, being fully aware of many other conversations and many other pieces of data that have been captured that provides the context to make good decisions, collaboratively between providers and patients, and then have society be able to make larger macro decisions about how resources are being distributed in different communities, in different settings, among different classes and races and genders. There's just 100 different dimensions to this that we need to be able to look at. And it really comes down at the end of the day of having hard data that helps people make better decisions in the face of unconscious bias.
Hey, John, can I take you down maybe a different path? And I hope this is the right
Sure, yeah,
slide, on social determinants of health, and then thinking interoperability of maybe other avenues, food, transportation, those things that are also things that to take care of the patient, that N of one, right? That we're all different. But what are your thoughts on some of those popping through in interoperability?
Well, I think that's really gets back to the, can data move from those multiple sources, right? When I talk about the data being from multiple places being accumulated, it's not just data that happened within a healthcare facility or context. It's, data from LexisNexis on zip codes and financial background. And, it's about knowing more about the patient. That gets back to the Google world. Healthcare, the process of delivery of healthcare and EMRs and provider automated workflows have not been designed to capture lots of information. I think you could, Salesforce made a good case for this. They didn't pull it off by a long shot, but they really had a vision where the CRM would actually become more important to a provider than their EMR, that their EMR would be a component of the customer relationship management system. That all the data, the patient's past context, their family history, socioeconomic data, where they've been from, where they were in a car accident 15 years ago that gave them back pain that they're not even telling you about, but, just knowing when you know more, it's, that total awareness of the patient. Now, again, am I advocating for Big Brother here? Interoperability by itself, can that lead us to a Big Brother situation where actually, like Janice's, consent, where actually the people I'm interacting with in my care journey know more about me than I'm comfortable with them knowing? Yes, it could. But does that technology and the arc toward that allow us to do things better with those, social determinants of health? In a lot of the conversation I've been in the last 4 years has been subsumed into the health equity conversation, right? It was an original focused on, very specific things that it was just a fundamental awareness. It's almost silly to even think about, but, why would this even be a question that caregivers should take into account a family situation or a social situation or an economic situation when they help that patient make decisions? We had that very basic conversation when we talked about tiered pharmacy benefits, right? Shouldn't doctors look for the generic drug that's only going to cost a poor patient? Shouldn't they take into account that if they're recommending a particular therapy to a patient that they can actually afford it, right? Whether if it's going to do them benefit, but they can't afford it, why even bring it up, right? So just having that basic information became important 15 years ago. and so social determinant, it took almost 15 years to get to the point where we even recognize officially that we shouldn't treat patients unless we have that data. And that opened up the question of, well, if we're treating patients without all the right data, then isn't there a value system in society that means we might collect the right data on some patients, but not on others, right? That for whatever reason, the system isn't set up to support equitable care across everybody in terms of the kind of questions we ask. If you're treating people in Newton Wellesley Hospital, the idea that there's not a lot of resources available is less important than if you're treating people in another part of Boston metropolitan area. And the systems need to support this, getting back to provider burnout, right? You can't blame the individual. Some individuals, sure, you can blame, but largely you can't make the individuals, put them at fault when they're not being supported in delivering good care to people. And I think that's where interoperability writ large is a much bigger conversation, and meaning that, the Cerner system can put in the A1C value and understand its full provenance and context that came from an Epic system or from a blood pressure or from a home monitor device or whatever, right? That's basic nuts and bolts. But now, and it kind of gets to the next slide, really, the idea of how do you use that information, and why is interoperability, and what did CMS do? Maybe we should move to the next slide and get to the next question.
I think we should. Let's go to the next slide. Why is interoperability key to better patient experiences with healthcare?
Yeah, and I pulled up this quick picture from IDC. There's lots of them out there, but it really, I think, captures the idea that in healthcare, we had to go very quickly from EDI to XML to API. Getting back to the first slide about making healthcare look like the rest of our lives, this data and answering questions the right way, we can't, unless you free the data into an API, make it accessible through APIs, you're not going to get process interoperability. You're not going to allow creative people to do creative things by having at the data and being able to do it with mobile apps and laptop apps without having the data organized in a fashion that can be readily accessed by APIs. I think after a bunch of billions of dollars, after high tech and era, a bunch of Nobel laureates called the Jasons that periodically write these papers for the federal government came out and essentially said, what were you thinking? You must have had your head up your butts. Did you not know in 2010 and 2012 and 2013 and 2014 that there's this thing called the internet, right? That we do live in a Google, Amazon world. Why would you design and spend all of this money on IHE protocols that were based on 40-year-old technology, right? Why? And why? I'll tell you why. Because that's a good way to keep, Microsoft and Dell and Epic and Cerner and, UPMC and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, keep the fortress of old white guys in charge of all of the data, right? Make it expensive to get into the interoperability club, as opposed to the internet, where two people in a garage can have at data that's readily available on the internet, write an app, and suddenly change the world, right? That's taking and liberating. There's a guy named Patrick Murta from Humana who did a whole lot of work for them on liberating data, just making it out there, making it work the way the internet worked, mark up all of the patient data so that and then releasing it, making it available. John Halomka, in his recent work at Mayo, it's just starting to come online. He was talking about it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but it's just starting to come online. The work they did with Google, where they're taking, millions and millions, tens of millions of patient records over the course of accumulated over 20 or 30 years, and making it de-identified so that anybody who's got a new medical device or a new piece of research they want to do or a cure for cancer can run their their hypotheses against very large sets of data to accelerate their release. If you think back how we thought it was going to take 20 years to do the genome, and then, you know, some guy in Maryland said, well, hey, I'm just going to use a bunch of Cray computers, and 3 years later he had cracked the human genome, right? That's, unless the data is in a format that can be exposed to APIs, we're not going to generate the kind of disruption and innovation that we need in healthcare to actually give better, faster, cheaper care to patients.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, no, I was just saying easier said than done. As you were talking, I was just thinking about internally how, you know, IT says we ought to get as much data as we can, land it in a lake or some construct, and then have at it, and then go back to the business and say, look at all this great stuff we found. I'm sure you can find even better stuff, you know, have at it with these tools. And every time we bring that up, it gets back to, well, why are you doing that? You're spending money that we don't have, and the business hasn't asked for that. And, you know, nobody's saying they need a lake. And, you know, why do you propose an infrastructure that nobody from the business is asking for? Right.
But again, this with the
and it gets into the circular conversation about where we want to spend our time on our treasure, and the advance of, you know, finding new innovative things about our members and how they access and use the system, and what we can convey back to them, back to our employers, our providers, everybody in the ecosystem, right? And it's just this, until somebody else says, hey, I want you to do this, and here's, you know, a few $100,000, go do it.
And this is
becomes very
exactly why
frustrating.
CMS said, you know what? I'm tired of you guys trying to do it. Give it to the patients. Make the patient the agent of interoperability. This is what the internet's about. The internet isn't about creating a giant lake with all the data in it. That's what Google wants, right? They want to have everything in there under their umbrella. The internet and APIs are about having that information exist in tiny little buckets all over the world,
all over the place. Yeah,
but have it be accessible.
yeah.
And that's what, by giving it to the patient, allowing the patient to put it into their health kit on the iPhone or Google Health, and then being able to have the patient upload it into a cloud infrastructure, and then having the patient be able to log into a new app that they're just really happy about, that's going to help them match their network providers to their new health insurance plan and help them pick between the 100 options they have on, you know,
Based on best utilization over the last 5
exactly,
years,
right?
Where do I need to, I see one doctor in one health system. Why do I need access to 50, right?
Exactly. And someone
So-
can write that app, and then someone can partner with someone else to create a whole new way of paying for healthcare. And until that data is in the hands of the patients in various clouds, where the patient allows anybody who's creative and they trust to have access to that data, we're not going to have that kind of innovation. And that's why CMS mandated it. And that's why a lot of people got pissed off. That's why all the EMR oligarchs said, no, we don't want to do that. You know, oh, but you're data blocking. No, we're not. We're not data blocking, right? Yes, you are.
It's more about being able to monetize that data set at some future point, right?
Well, yeah, that's why, again, gets back to 20% of the GDP, and all the venture guys out there and the hundreds of millions of dollars are saying, wow, if I just had that data and I combine that with AI and ML, then, and I can own it and I have rights to it and I can make it proprietary, then I can make a lot of money. But that never flows back to the actual patient.
That's right.
Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track here. I'm becoming a
This
radical
is where,
communist here.
well, we know that about you, John, and we're just going to have to put, no, not really, but, you know, one of the questions that this raises is, we see a future where we have the patient as the agent. We see a future where not even a patient, a person who, when we talk about, you know, folks who are Gen Z, you know, pre-millennial, you know, post-millennials, we're talking about people who don't use the healthcare system as much as those of us who are older and really see healthcare the way we see it. We're not the target demographic, as is often the case. We're looking at a world that is moving in the direction of those who are younger and who are going to make choices about how they pick their doctors, how they use healthcare. And things are developing to a degree where that is not going to necessarily be, I'm going to stay within one system and have my doctor in that system, because that requires that I wait 3 months for an appointment. It requires that I drive clear across town. It requires that I I go through the gauntlet that is registration, and I don't want to do that anymore. So I think we are seeing, a case for moving from where we are today to radically changing how we define quality and value, because as you pointed out, many people are not going to do what we've inured ourselves to over the years when it comes to doing their healthcare.
Yeah, and
We
there's
are
a
nearing.
couple, I just want to pull a John Halumka here and say, that, so for example, there's a company called Empowered Home out there that I bumped into recently. Think about the wired home to the smart home to the empowered home, right? We have a shortage of people, we have a shortage of resources, and we have all this AI and ML and technology coming online and the Internet of Things, right? Well, why can't you build a house that's actually empowered to take care, right? Coordinate a bunch of devices that will help people who are recovering to fix post-acute care time, to monitor your family that's 5,000 miles away, to help families know what's happening in a nursing home with their mother, right? Empower the context, the physical environment of people to actually become a caregiver. The house itself is a caregiver, and then that data is in real time automatically pushed back to anybody that needs to see it, whether it's the doctor, the nurse, the parent, the teacher, whatever, to take care of that patient, right? And there's another consumer app, One Record, that was recently purchased by the Milliman Consulting Group, right? Now, Milliman has tons of insurance data to help advise people on all kinds of things on a commercial B2B level. They're looking to start to take all of their smarts about how to help people pick insurance plans and take that directly to the customer. So they bought this little, very smart, Fire-based consumer mobile app called One Record. And I would say within 18, 24 months, you're going to see a really powerful app. The first one that I've seen that really seems to embrace the CMS vision of putting the patient in charge of their data and then getting value out of it. And over the course of the next 18, 24 months, you're going to see that blow open, and it's really going to radically start to address the power dynamic in, who's making decisions about quality and value.
Well, I want to thank you, John and Dave and Bill, for participating in today's meeting. I want to encourage folks who would like to stay online and continue the conversation. We have another 30 minutes reserved for today's discussion. I want to share with you a little bit about what's coming up next. You see that we have on Thursday, March 9th, exploring the use cases for interoperability in greater detail. And these use cases are health equity and the consumer's experience of healthcare. Whether you're a patient, a member, an individual looking for healthcare, how do we improve that experience, and how do we improve and address the inequities in health? We're bringing Mark Friedberg and Anna Hyde to join us in that conversation. We encourage you to sign up and register, and look forward to having that conversation as well. We also want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up. On the 23rd of February, MHDC will be demonstrating our Spotlight Analytics system, which is focused on increasingly health system value, not just in terms of quality and cost, but also in terms of equity, in terms of delivering, the care that everyone deserves to have an equal shot at good health. And we'll be showing what we're doing in Spotlight and what we have planned, which is quite exciting. I think that covers our discussion as a formal meeting, and we're moving now into our post meeting, and we can open it up for questions and the like from other folks who want to participate with us. Don't forget to complete the brief survey. We thank those of you who have to leave now. If those of you who are online want to stay on and enjoy a continuing discussion, I see that most people are still online, which is excellent. And we're moving into the post presentation part of our forum today, into the open discussion. So we'll open our mics, and we ask that folks feel free to ask your questions and join our conversation.
Hi, yeah, I've got
Hi.
a bunch of thoughts running through my head. Hi, John, it's John Bitterman.
Yep. Hi, John.
The to the last points about, you know, putting the patient in power and everything, I think one of the challenges and why that may be, you know, sort of overly optimistic is that most people want to interact with the healthcare system as little as possible, right? It's an occasional thing that they, unlike for us, it's the center of our lives. We're in the business, but the typical patient wants as little to do with healthcare as possible. So, you know, thinking that they're going to be actively managing their records and figuring out, you know, who gets access to it, and even mastering the way to do that, because if it's something you attend to only once a year, every time you go try to do it, you have to relearn how to. I'm not sure, you know, that the patient empowerment is necessarily going to be the panacea.
Yeah, I think, and that's what comes down to, there's a chicken and egg thing here. Until the data is out there, the people aren't going to be writing the apps. They're going to change that dynamic, right? If I go back a bunch of years, you know, in terms of managing my 401k, I didn't do a lot. I felt like, you know, I really don't understand. I don't want to take risks. You know, I'm going to just let Fidelity, you know, go ahead and cross my fingers and hope that I made a couple of key decisions up front that were smart. Fast forward today, I mean, think how many people are using apps to buy and sell stock, to buy and sell crypto, right? I mean, like it isn't, and you could argue that there's a lot of people who lost money with crypto, right? But some of them are making it back. The fact is that when we transition to this this new world, we're going to have people developing apps that make it so that people do want to engage on a daily basis. They're getting notifications, they're getting emails and stuff that says, hey, did you think about this? Hey, did you think about that? Stuff at first, you know, you or I now might find intrusive. But when you think about the people coming along, that's not intrusive, right? They are used to opening up the phone multiple times a day and checking in on things that have proven to them to feel valuable. What is valuable is their well-being, right? They want to make sure younger people spend a lot of time concerned about their well-being. They make job choices based on work-life balance, right? And if there are apps that are aware of them at a very granular level that includes healthcare, but isn't limited to just pure their doctors and nurses and whatever, those apps are going to mash up all the aspects of their life and create something that has value. And until the data is there for those people to invent those experiences, we're not going to see it. And, you know, people like you and I might be skeptical, but I can guarantee you that it's a rock in the air. It's going to hit the ground.
And
Again, I'm speaking for young people. I don't know if there are any on the phone that can tell me either, hey, you're crazy, you don't understand us, or you know what, I guess you do have a young daughter.
We think you have a young daughter, John. I'll take
Okay.
that.
She's I don't know, is 30 still considered young?
30's young enough to check their apps every day. Let's put it that way.
I think he brings up a good point.
I agree with you. The rocket's in the air, but it may just land with a thud. That's the only thing we need to be careful about.
Yeah,
well, there's hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in something called the health app economy, or billions of dollars probably at this point. And whether and I do believe I will live to see the day when that's a very large economic sector.
John,
Thank you, John. Those are good questions. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm sorry, Danny. John, I was just going to add, I think that John Bitterman's observation about the data is important because it is about the different stages that consumers are in, how they leverage and want to leverage, and whether or not They're older population utilizing more of the healthcare system, but unable to harness technology. They typically have advocates that get frustrated with the system, who are those advocates are much younger and want those tools, but it becomes a very different experience, for the patient and their advocates. And I think understanding that, the data for those constituents at that moment across those use cases is really key, because the app economy is going to evolve differently by demographic, right? So you're going to have things focused for advocates that are usable by patients, things just focused for advocates or healthcare caregivers in support of their patients or their family members. And you're going to have those that family members are aging into those types of services that they're comfortable with the technology. They have smartphones while they're in their 70s and 80s, and they know how to manage and leverage the apps across it to better provide better care along the way, whether that's scheduling or doing pharmacy or sharing data with their care team. But it's a very different dynamic across, very different populations from millennials on up.
Well, it is, I think, though, when you think about the tipping points that we're reaching with AI and ML, I mean, think about how quickly did that whole, I'm trying to remember the name of it, the chat.
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. Yeah.
How quick did that come out? I mean, maybe, again, maybe I'm showing my age. Felt like that came out
Yesterday.
of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's everywhere. And, and people are questioning whether or not schools are now being threatened, right? And yet the people in those schools are going, well, we're not quite, it took a long time for IBM to figure out how to beat a chess master, right? It's going to still take a good while before that app and those apps like that are going to, threaten certain industries. But the reality is that they haven't even touched healthcare yet, and yet they will over the next 18 to 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about these healthcare apps, think of it more like when we came out, and where that's evolved to now, where you can check your golf swing, right? If we're looking, and this is where like empowered home type stuff comes in, think about you get interviewed by your practitioner maybe once a week if you're doing PT at home, right? After hip surgery or knee or back or whatever. What if you've got this device from a Belgian company called Nobi in your house? It's a lamp, gets mounted either on a desk or in the ceiling. And it can tell if your finger's bent 15 degrees, right? That app is watching you sit at your desk, right, and do your work, right? It's watching you get up. It knows whether you actually even did your PT, right? And it's it knows if you got up and rolled out of bed the wrong way. It knows if you are performing your exercises well and accurately. That is where these things will start to come in. These apps are going to be very targeted. They're not going to be I'm going to replace your doctor or health system. They're going to be, I'm going to make sure you get back to work 20% faster than if you didn't have this app in the house, right? That's where these things will start to come in, and then they'll just get rapidly accepted. They'll become ubiquitous and part of our lives. That makes sense, Dave?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we, at Harvard Pilgrim, 7, 8 years ago, we looked at a company, another San Francisco-based company had an app ecosystem on the phone that was revolutionary at the time. A lot of excitement. It could do wound management, high, 3D enhanced, pictures based on your cell phone camera. All this great stuff that you could collaborate with a care team. It could do range of motion for PT visits and things like that. They had a lot of promise. With the Mayo Clinic and other, investor partners leveraging it, and it's nowhere to be found now. So these things come and go. They go through, economic life cycles, and I think that the technology, spurs other innovatives to drive and change the world, and a lot of it's based on similar concepts. it all comes down to the marketplace. How can I make money on it? How can I drive, adoption? And how can I get enough investors to think that this is going to be the next big thing?
John, do you have any thoughts on the duplication of data issues that are possible? CMS is suggesting that the data record should all come from the payer, that the patient should get their clinical data from the payer, and that should all come through the patient access APIs. Providers are also sending information, and they're also required to support FHIR APIs. And a lot of this data is getting sent from provider to provider, provider to patient to provider, provider to payer to patient. And so there's multiple copies of the same records floating around, and hopefully they're all the same, although there's no guarantee because mistakes happen. And so I'm not talking about the issue of correcting something that a patient knows, but just the fact that there's so many different sources for getting the same data that's kind of inherent in this system.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to the whole chicken and egg thing. Until the data is out there, we're not going to perfect the process for getting value out of the data, right? And so, is there a lot of signal to noise? Or is a high noise to signal ratio right now? Very high. But again, just the AI ML stuff that's come out online in the last within the last 24 months is quite amazing. I mean, when you think about what Siri, could do 4 years ago versus what all of these basically robot apps can do now, it's just amazing. The tipping point on the capabilities on this kind of stuff to clean up data has been really crossed radically. It's one of the few areas where it's funny when you retire, suddenly a lot of people call you as, they want you to be an advisor to their harebrained scheme. And I just heard just in the last few months, lots of colleagues of mine who are retired, who are working for and calling me about companies that are saying, I can make sense of all this crazy data. Now, do they all have a great idea? No, obviously not. But do I think that within a couple of years or less, there'll be people who can address the problem you just described very well with high levels of accuracy, and then do predictive modeling to extend their accuracy on the quality of making sure that we don't have duplicates and that we have credible data. And then when you think about pulling in data from LexisNexis and augmenting the file to validate and verify that the data set is complete and accurate, that's just a bunch of work to be done. The technology is clearly there and available at this point, as far as I'm concerned.
One of the areas, John, that is a link that you've referenced, Dave, you've referenced it, and it's a human link, is that it's not always the patient who is going to be the driver of how their health data is managed. It may be their primary care physician, it may be a care partner, it may be a family member. And one of the areas that I see frequently, one of the things that I see frequently missing in the conversation is when we talk about a patient-centered health data economy, we're really talking about a patient and their kind of key care partner. This is not something that people are necessarily going to be able to navigate on their own. Some people don't want to. Some people don't like to be confronted with their health. They tell their doctors, I don't care what it is, just fix it. They need to have a relationship to guide them through this. Some people will be fine on their own, but a lot of people are going to, for reasons of disposition, reasons of economics, health illiteracy, mistrust of the system, they're going to want to have a personal relationship with a trusted party, a trusted care partner who can walk with them through these new technological innovations that data will make available. Can you talk a little bit about that link and how we might go about closing that link so that people are actually more engaged in this health data economy, when before they were pretty dependent on a relationship to get them through. Those relationships are strained now. And how are we going to fill that missing gap?
Well, I think it's a journey, right? But I don't think it's a long journey. I think, you know, the reality is people want more, because it's been proven that there are things that would be good for people to have or engage in that they don't have access to now for whatever reason, cost or availability. But a lot of things that would be good for people that are being primarily delivered by humans, there's not enough humans and they're too expensive, right? This whole idea of the empowered home, it's not going to replace PT or OT people. It's not going to replace providers. It's not going to replace, you know, home care workers, but it's going to augment and extend them, right? I mean, think there's a you know, whole industry of human extenders now, right? The idea that robots are going to take our place is still long into the future. The idea that we will be robotically enhanced virtually is here today. And so apps are the interface, today's interface, probably for at least for the next 5, 10, 15 years. Apps is how we will integrate with those extenders, right? And at the core of apps is having data available through APIs. And so with the tsunami of data that's going to come on available right now, there's largely noise because of the mandates. People will quickly start to sift through the data. When some really smart people sift through some of that data, they're going to innovate and create and make something that will help people better. And this is not me pie in the sky. This is the way the entire internet economy has evolved since, you know, the early 90s, right? That when suddenly a bunch of data is available and it's marked up, someone comes along and says, wow, I can do this with that. I mean, go no further than Jeff Bezos, right? I mean, and then everybody said, wow, that worked for that. Now let me do Uber. Now let me tap into all the idle capacity in the economic system and put buyers and sellers together, right? At the end of the day, this is just an extension of that. You know, the people who have something to offer and the people who need that thing are going to be put together using these APIs and machines. And as a whole new domain of data, patient data related to health and well-being starts to come online and become available in APIs, it will get marked up, it will get organized, and it will get developed into targeted individual apps, not monolithic systems that are going to do everything for everybody everywhere. Because those days are gone. The world doesn't work like that anymore. But am I totally convinced that healthcare, now that the data is being organized and made available through the mandates for the patient in APIs, that suddenly a bunch of people, some scrupulous, some unscrupulous, some geniuses, some people who just, you know, put together hack stuff, but all of that activity is about to blow open. And I'm not alone. I mean, there's just billions of dollars of capital flowing into that health app economy right now. And out of that, there are going to be a bunch of home runs and a bunch of strikeouts.
That's right.
Alexa and Siri becoming my healthcare advocates and my healthcare navigators.
I mean, some people, I mean, people are already doing that with some of these apps because they're voice activated, and Siri now has access to the health kit, right?
We did a prototype like that internally. You know, we'd say, Alexa, Tommy's got a fever, and Alexa would know. The prototype was Alexa knew that Tommy was a 12-year-old asthmatic, right? And it would come back and say, do you want me to call so-and-so and do such and such, right? You know, but there were challenges with that, getting that pushed along internally.
Yeah. Well,
So.
we've come a long way from Eliza. I don't know if anyone else remembers Eliza, but that very early AI from the 70s and 80s that tried to be a psychologist.
But, you know, but case in point, to think about how that 70s and 80s voice recognition technology, where you had a very specific subdomain of language in radiology, automated far ahead of everybody else. Radiology department reports were being automated using voice recognition technology, and the phrases were being created, and drop-down boxes were being created to allow radiologists to accomplish a lot more work, a lot more quickly, with a little headset device that they just walked around and looked at films with, as opposed to sitting down at terminals and whatever, right? That was the beginning. And that was because it worked, because there was a very specific subdomain. You know, I remember reading research that radiologists only used about 100 words in their reports, right? It was a bunch of phrases that were all catalog phrases that they strung together, and that the variation in the words was really based on certain conditions and certain types of films. And so because it was a very targeted environment, they were able to accomplish a lot. And but now 40 years later, with the AI, the ML, and now all this patient data marked up, we are starting to see those kind of very highly production capable results that are hitting the market.
Timing is everything.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things John points out that's really the proof of the pudding is in the eating, is in the serious amount of money that's being funneled into these technologies, these healthcare consumer apps. If you follow the money, I mean, if you look at the level of spending that's going into creating multiple alternatives to the current health system, ones that look to leverage the internet far more than has been the case with the portals that providers use today, or the bare use of the internet that is used by providers and plans. The writing's on the wall. The question is what are going to be the home runs in the near term, and what are going to be the strikeouts? And usually strikeouts are followed by hits, when they learn what didn't work, and the money moves to the things that do work. So we're not looking at something blooming out of nothing. We're looking at a lot of capital being put to bear, far more than when people were talking about make healthcare look more like business, even far more than when Amazon created Haven. That was considered sort of on the edge, but now the money is moving at a much greater volume into much more technologically enabled solutions. It's really a matter of time to see, and not too much time, I think, to see what starts emerging from that. I think that the wired home, the real medical home, not the one that we talk about on the provider delivery system, but the one that is our own home, is really already demonstrated enormous value in the work of a number of organizations that got out in front of this in advance of the pandemic and started creating more powered homes for people to have supporting their care process, rather than having to go somewhere for these types of services to be delivered. So I'm excited. I don't know I no crystal ball, but the fact that the economy, the health data economy, is starting to show that it has real legs when it comes to investment capital is a very good indicator that things are going to be happening in the future. So I think what you said there, John, is absolutely spot on. And it's going to change a lot of things for a lot of people, but probably not in the ways that some of us think today. We have just a few minutes left. I know we're looking at 10:27. Any final comments, John? Anything, thoughts you would like to share with us to wrap us up today and give us a sense that we have a bright and hopeful future with all these new technologies?
I'll say we have a future.
Thanks for that. Those are words of wisdom. Yes, there will be a tomorrow.
It will be
Bright
a
and
tomorrow.
hopeful depends on your context, right?
Yeah, I just think I am optimistic that one thing the pandemic did is suddenly, when everybody was worrying about the baby boomers getting older and the demands on the health system and not going to be enough people, not going to be enough resources, along came the pandemic. There were no rooms in the hospital. There wasn't enough equipment. There wasn't enough capacity. We got through it. And guess what? Nobody is talking about the baby boomers anymore, right? People are talking now about the health experience, the user experience, the patient experience, these apps, connectivity, right? these are the challenge. I mean, if the biggest complaint we have is that we have too much data that we can't seem to make sense of, then I know a lot of people out there who are saying, get out of my way and just let me have at it, because I will fix this.
Yeah. There's no small club of we can't do it with the data. It's a crowd that wants to get at these data and make something valuable out of it.
And there will be train wrecks, right? If the data is democratized and you allow people to make mistakes, we're basically, the kids you have to give them the keys to the car sometime, right? And payers and providers now have to turn the keys to the car over to the kids, and they will have some accidents. And unfortunately, some people will die. But we're not going to get to that hopeful, optimistic future without going through this shakeout period.
And if you've ever been in the experience of telling a 16-year-old that no, they're not going to be able to drive because it's just too dangerous, and we're going to keep you protected until you're much more mature, you will quickly realize you're on the wrong. You are going to lose that debate very quickly.
The other lesson out of the pandemic, though, was the abysmal state of interoperability in the public health data ecosystem. And, so you can't hand over the keys to your kids unless you actually built a car.
Yeah, and
That's
so
right.
we got a Model T out there now. It's not a Lexus or a Tesla by any shot, but it will. I think my own opinion is it will quickly get there because there's just too many people that want that car.
Well, we're right at the bottom of the hour, and I want to thank John Kelly for joining us today and leading this discussion. It's always great to hear from you, John, and I always get excited about our prospects when I listen to you. I sometimes, we're in the health data business deeply. We sort of see the exceptions as being more pronounced than the real rules and the real progress. It's great to hear what you have to share with us in our community today. Bill and Dave, thank you as our chairs for introducing this session. We look forward to seeing all of you and our audience at our next executive forum on the use cases of health equity and the consumer experience. And with that, don't forget also, we'll send you a survey for your input on today's meeting. We're adjourned. Everybody have a good day. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, thanks
Thanks,
everybody for
everyone.
the chance to
Thank
talk
you.
healthcare.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye-bye.